Hey everyone, welcome back. Returning home after another exhausting day at work, I was met with an eerie silence. The comforting aromas of home-cooked meals were now replaced by the faint, unappealing scent of reheated leftovers. High-end shopping bags cluttered the dining table, their logos screaming extravagance. I sighed, placing my briefcase down, acutely aware of the disparity between my efforts and the scene before me. There she was, lounging on the couch, her eyes glued to her phone, scrolling endlessly. "What's for dinner?" I asked, attempting to mask my growing frustration with a light tone. Without looking up, she muttered, "Ordered takeout? It'll be here soon." This wasn't an isolated incident. The homemade meals and immaculate home I once knew had become relics of the past. The kitchen stood as a mere backdrop, and the rest of the house was descending into chaos. Dishes piled up, laundry neglected, and dust coating the floors. I didn't want to start an argument. I was too drained for that. But the resentment simmered, building each time I walked into a house that no longer felt like a home. That night, over discarded takeout boxes, I finally spoke up. "We need to talk," I began. She rolled her eyes, irritation flashing across her face. "About what now?" "About this, about us," I pressed. "I need your support." Her response was sharp, dismissive. "I didn't marry you to play housemaid or chef. If you want that, hire someone." The coldness of her words lingered long after the conversation ended. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing just how far apart we had drifted. The next morning, the tension between us was so thick it felt as if even the air had grown heavy. I woke up earlier than usual, still carrying the weight of our argument from the night before. She had already risen and was seated in the living room, casually scrolling through her phone as though the confrontation hadn't happened. Grabbing my coffee, I sat across from her, determined to try one more time to bridge the growing chasm between us. "I don't think you understand how much this situation is affecting me," I began, careful to keep my tone steady. She didn't look up. Her attention remained fixed on her phone. After a long pause, she finally responded, her voice flat, almost dismissive. "Why are we doing this again? I told you last night, I'm not your maid." Her words, delivered with a tone of exasperation, cut deeper than she realized. "I'm not asking you to be a maid," I replied, my frustration bubbling to the surface despite my efforts to suppress it. "I'm asking you to be a partner, someone who shares the load, someone who cares about this marriage as much as I do." At this, she laughed, not a light-hearted chuckle, but a bitter, mocking sound that reverberated through the room. "You think this is some kind of partnership?" she asked, finally meeting my gaze. Her eyes were sharp, unyielding. "Let's be clear. I didn't sign up to be your servant or housekeeper. If you want that, hire someone." Her words hung in the air, cold and final. I sat there, stunned into silence. It wasn't just what she said, but the conviction behind it, the sheer lack of consideration for how I was feeling. "You don't mean that," I said, almost as a plea. "What about us? What about the life we're supposed to be building together?" She sighed, the sound laden with boredom. "I've told you before. I'm not going to change who I am just because you feel unappreciated. If you're unhappy, that's on you." Her dismissiveness stung more than any outright insult could have. It wasn't just indifference. It was a refusal to even consider the idea of compromise. For the first time, I realized that we weren't just growing apart. We were on completely different paths. The day stretched on with a sense of inevitability weighing heavily over me. At work, her words replayed in my mind like a broken record. Her apathy, her entitlement, her refusal to acknowledge my sacrifices, they all piled up, creating a storm of emotions I couldn't ignore any longer. That evening, as I walked through the door, I decided something had to change. No more pleading, no more reasoning. It was time to take matters into my own hands. The weight of my decision lingered in the air as I stepped into the house that evening. Her apathy had solidified something within me, a determination to reclaim my sense of self-worth. For years, I had bent over backward to maintain harmony, only to be met with disregard. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I retreated to the bedroom, grabbed my laptop, and began reviewing our finances. As I scrolled through our joint accounts, I couldn't help but notice the absurdity of it all. Designer handbags, luxury dinners, spa appointments. It was a ledger of indulgence, one-sided and unsustainable. With a firm resolve, I started making changes. The credit card she used so liberally? Cancelled. The one remaining card? Its spending limit was drastically reduced. From that moment on, she would have to adjust her lifestyle to something more reasonable. The next morning, she was quick to notice. Her voice pierced through the quiet house as she stormed into the room, phone in hand. "Why is my card being declined?" she demanded, her tone teetering between anger and disbelief. I didn't even look up from my coffee. "I adjusted the limits," I replied matter-of-factly. She stared at me, incredulous. "Adjusted the limits? What does that even mean?" "It means," I said, finally meeting her gaze, "that if you want to spend more, you'll need to start contributing. I'm done being the sole provider while you sit back and enjoy the benefits." Her reaction was instant, a mix of fury and entitlement. "Contributing? I'm your wife, not your employee. What's gotten into you?" I set my coffee down and leaned back in my chair, my voice steady but firm. "And I'm your husband, not your bank. If you don't want to contribute to this partnership, then you'll need to start funding your own lifestyle." Her face turned red, her hands clenching at her sides. "You're punishing me because I won't be your housemaid? That's pathetic." "No," I said calmly. "I'm setting boundaries. You've made it clear that you have no interest in contributing to this marriage. I've decided I won't keep enabling that behavior." Her fury boiled over in the days that followed. She sulked around the house, throwing sarcastic remarks my way and trying to guilt-trip me with lines like, "I guess you don't love me anymore." But I stood my ground, refusing to engage with her attempts to manipulate me. When she tried to buy another expensive pair of shoes and the transaction was declined, her frustration erupted again. "You're controlling," she shouted. But her accusations didn't faze me. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going back. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control over my life. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The changes I implemented didn't take long to ripple through her carefully constructed world. At first, it was subtle. She acted as though the adjustments to her spending habits were minor inconveniences, brushing them off with dismissive remarks. But as the days passed, the cracks in her facade became more pronounced. It started with the delivery driver. I overheard the doorbell and her hurried conversation as she tried to explain why her payment wasn't going through. "It's just a glitch," she muttered to the driver, her voice strained. After fumbling for a few moments, she eventually had to cancel the order, slamming the door shut in frustration. Her once flawless composure began to falter. Without access to unlimited funds, she started pulling out clothes she hadn't worn in years, trying to make them work instead of indulging in her usual shopping sprees. Her nails, always perfectly manicured, were now chipped. Calls from her favorite spa went unanswered, the voicemails deleted without response. Her social life began to suffer, too. Lavish brunches with her friends turned into polite excuses about feeling under the weather or being too busy at home. I knew better. It wasn't illness or busyness keeping her away. It was the inability to maintain the lifestyle that she had grown accustomed to. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to find her sitting at the table, her phone in her hand but her gaze distant. Her expression, once confident and carefree, now seemed uncertain, almost vulnerable. "I'm doing everything I can to make this work," she said suddenly, her voice barely audible. "But you're making it impossible." I leaned against the counter, taking a measured sip of water. "Making what work?" I asked. "Your lifestyle? The one I've been funding single-handedly while you contribute nothing?" Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of anger returning to her face. "You're being cruel," she snapped. I shook my head, setting the glass down with deliberate care. "Cruel is expecting me to carry this marriage alone," I said evenly. "Cruel is taking my efforts for granted while giving nothing in return. Cruel is treating me like an ATM instead of a partner." For the first time in a long time, her sharp retorts were absent. She sat there in silence, her gaze falling to the table as if she couldn't meet my eyes. The days that followed were quieter, though not in a peaceful way. The silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken tension. I caught her making small attempts to tidy the house or clean a room, but her efforts felt half-hearted, more like gestures than genuine attempts to contribute. Her friends began to notice the change in her, too. One even called the house while she was out, asking if everything was okay. "She's been so distant lately," the friend remarked, her voice tinged with concern. "She's fine," I replied curtly, unwilling to explain the unraveling of our relationship. But she wasn't fine, and we both knew it. The days turned into weeks, and the once vibrant energy in the house had all but vanished. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, sharing a simple meal I had prepared, she broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she began hesitantly, her eyes fixed on her plate. "Maybe I haven't been fair to you." The admission caught me off guard. For months, she had deflected, argued, and dismissed my concerns. Hearing her acknowledge her role in the strain between us was unexpected, but I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. She fidgeted with her fork, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her own words. "I know I've made mistakes," she said, her voice soft. "I got comfortable, too comfortable, and I took you for granted." Her words, though honest, felt hollow. They came too late, after too many arguments and too much indifference. I wanted to believe her, to let her sincerity mend the damage, but a part of me had already moved on. "I hear what you're saying," I replied after a long pause, my tone measured. "And I appreciate that you're finally acknowledging it. But words alone aren't enough. The trust, the respect, they've been eroded over time. I'm not sure they can be rebuilt." Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she straightened her back, her expression shifting from sorrow to desperation. "I can change," she insisted. "I'll do whatever it takes. Just give me a chance." I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. "You've had chances," I said firmly, "more than I can count. And every time, you chose yourself over us. I can't keep holding on to hope that things will change when your actions tell me otherwise." She reached for my hand, her grip tight, almost pleading. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I love you." I pulled my hand back gently but decisively. "Love isn't enough anymore," I said quietly. "Not after everything. I needed your love when it mattered, when I came home exhausted and just wanted a partner. But now, I don't think I can keep doing this." Her tears finally fell, silent and unrestrained. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, only a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't how I had envisioned our marriage, but it was the reality we had created together, or rather, the reality she had let unravel. The house grew colder in the days that followed our conversation. She retreated to the guest room, leaving an unspoken divide between us that felt insurmountable. There were no more attempts to plead or promises of change. The silence between us became a constant companion, oppressive yet liberating. One morning, I stood in the living room, staring at the remnants of the life we had tried to build together. The wedding photos on the mantel, the extravagant decor she had picked out, the luxury furniture that seemed more ornamental than functional. It all felt meaningless now, symbols of a partnership that had faded into a transactional relationship. I made up my mind. It was time to end this chapter of my life and begin anew. I grabbed a stack of garbage bags and started packing her belongings. Designer handbags, overpriced clothes, and shoes that could fund a vacation were carefully folded and placed into the bags. Each item was a reminder of how much I had sacrificed to fund a lifestyle she had come to expect without effort. By the time she woke up, the living room was filled with black bags lined up by the door. She stumbled into the room, still groggy, and froze at the sight. Her eyes darted from the bags to me, disbelief etched across her face. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "This is me moving on," I said calmly. "I've carried this relationship alone for too long, and I'm done. You need to leave." Her face twisted in anger. "You can't just throw me out. Where am I supposed to go?" I stood firm, my voice steady but resolute. "That's not my concern anymore. You've made it clear you don't need me, so prove it. Go build the life you think you deserve, but do it on your own." For a moment, she looked as though she might argue. but then her confidence faltered. She crossed her arms, her voice dropping to a defensive sneer. "You'll regret this. You're throwing away everything we've built." I shook my head. "What we've built? I've built this life while you sat back and watched. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done." Her silence was deafening. She turned and walked away, retreating to the guest room once more. I didn't follow. Instead, I finished packing her belongings and set them neatly by the door. That afternoon, she called a friend to pick her up. She didn't say goodbye when she left, simply grabbing the bags and walking out the door without a second glance. I watched from the window as the car drove away, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. The house was quiet, but for the first time, the silence felt freeing. The days that followed were filled with a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house felt like my own, a space where I could breathe and begin again. I started by rearranging the furniture, reclaiming the rooms that had once felt foreign to me. The wedding photos came down, and the decorative items she had insisted on were boxed away and donated. Each small act of change felt like shedding a layer of the life that had weighed me down. I took the time to focus on myself, something I hadn't done in years. Friends began reaching out, asking how I was doing. I told them the truth. I was better than I had been in a long time. I started reconnecting with hobbies and passions I had abandoned during the marriage. I went hiking, joined a book club, and even began cooking for myself again, rediscovering the joy of creating something with my own hands. Slowly but surely, I felt like I was reclaiming the person I had been before the relationship. The financial stability I regained was another unexpected relief. Without the constant drain of her extravagant spending, I was able to save, invest, and plan for the future I wanted. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the freedom to make choices that benefited me for a change. Every night, as I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea or a glass of wine, I reflected on how far I had come. The anger and resentment I had carried for so long were replaced by a quiet sense of peace. Weeks turned into months, and the sense of freedom I felt only grew stronger. I began to see the end of my marriage not as a failure, but as a turning point, a necessary step toward a life of authenticity and self-respect. The solitude didn't feel lonely. Instead, it became a space for reflection and growth. I realized how much of myself I had lost trying to sustain a relationship that was never balanced. Now, I had the chance to rebuild, not just my life, but my sense of self. Occasionally, I would hear about her through mutual friends. She had moved in with her parents for a while and was trying to piece her life back together. Part of me wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, but I didn't dwell on it. Her journey was no longer my concern. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my porch, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the pain or the struggles, but for the lessons they had taught me. I had learned to set boundaries, to value my own worth, and to recognize when it was time to let go. This was my life now, quiet, fulfilling, and entirely my own. And for the first time in years, I was truly excited about what the future might hold. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and redemption, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Lost Love Mystery. Your support helps us bring you more heartfelt tales like this one. Have a story of your own? Feel free to share it with us. We'd love to hear from you. Stay tuned for more stories that touch the soul and remind us of the strength in every heart.